Guess we're open and
No, not yet.
call the roll as well.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is an October 23rd, 2012 meeting of the Raleigh Conservation Commission, which is hereby called to order under authority of MGL Chapter 131, Section 40, the Town of Raleigh's Wetlands Protection Bylaw, and the Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw. I will now call the roll for attendance. Robert Carpenter.
Present.
Dave DeMonico.
Here.
Bob Garner.
Here.
Judy Keys is absent. Sam Strife.
Here.
Kurt Turner.
Here.
Doug Watson is absent. So if there's consensus from the commissioners, Mr. Watson emailed me and requested that Kurt Turner perform the duties as acting chair this evening.
Any objections or anybody want a roll call vote? Hearing no objections, we have a consensus.
Great. Then, Mr. Chairman, I have presented before you for your consideration draft minutes. There are no payroll or vendor authorizations to present to the commission tonight. So I thought it might be an opportune moment to review draft minutes that I prepared.
These are the minutes of February 15th, 2011.
That is correct.
All right, let's do that. First, applicant isn't until 7:45, so we have a few minutes.
Could you just give us this?
I'm sorry?
Could you just give us this?
Yes. I just distributed that.
That's what
I just received it yesterday.
Trying to figure out why I haven't had it.
Everybody read the minutes? Draft minutes?
Yep.
Anybody have any suggested changes?
Nope.
Nobody does? Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimously approved? Nays?
And just for the commission's information, we've received a request, which is one of the items that was distributed to you, which has a cover memo from the planning board requesting the Conservation Commission take a look at the proposed conservation restriction being submitted by the applicant for the open space residential development called the Residences at Carriage Pine. I believe it's a 8-page document, copy both sides. And also the planning board had submitted a question to town council, and so included is a double-sided copy that was town council's comment based on the specific question that was asked by the planning board. At this point in time, my understanding is that town council is not asked to specifically review the language of the conservation restriction itself, but was asked to evaluate whether it met the planning board's requirements as expressed in their open space residential development regulations, which becomes apparent once you read the memo.
From town council, Judy Pickett.
I assume this is something we don't have to take up tonight?
That is correct.
All right.
That is correct. But I'm not sure how exactly to handle this though, because the planning board is hoping that they will receive comments by their November 7th meeting, and the commission's next meeting is November 13th. So, could certainly do this by just emailing your comments or questions to myself, and then I will assemble it into a memorandum to the planning board with comments and concerns. And
By what date would you like those? I got time. Need a bigger print calendar.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, just move it over here.
I guess by Halloween would be good.
30th?
31st.
So
30th or
week from
31st.
tomorrow. It's a week, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, the first comment that comes to mind from our perspective is to have Judy Pickett Town Council definitely review any proposed language in the conservation restriction, as well as, my understanding is there's been discussion as to about the status of it being a perpetual restriction and what happens at that point in time. And let's see, I think the other things I heard was the applicant was not proposing to submit a plan specifying the restricted areas, which obviously the conservation restriction, in order to be perpetual, is going to have to meet the criteria set forth by the state. You will see some reference in Judy Pickett's comment about state consideration of a conservation restriction and the fact that you need to have a clear depiction of what areas are subject to the restriction, and so that you can evaluate whether the allowed uses and the prohibited uses, whether they're appropriate for actually protecting natural resources and extending the benefit to the community at large. So that's just a preliminary sort of heads up on things to keep in mind as well.
Well, when we initiate or approve something that requires a conservation restriction, doesn't town council review that
Yes.
as a matter of course? Well, I think town council should review this as a matter of course, and I,
Oh, well, yes, I just didn't want you to be confused by seeing a memorandum from Judy Pickett in her capacity as town council, and then when you got to the subject matter, see that it doesn't really address any of the specific language in the restriction. She was asked a specific question about zoning board's requirements. And
zoning board or the planning board?
the planning board, I'm sorry. Planning board, slip of the tongue.
Well, I might recommend that you check with Doug, but it seems to me that she ought to be requested to review it from our standpoint as soon as practical, so as to give her enough time to.
Right, well, I think
Good point.
I've glanced at it, and I believe as the members of the commission read it and review, you will see that there are a multitude of substantive concerns and issues that
I believe it.
should be addressed right from the get-go, and at this early stage, it may be premature to actually, well, I mean, again, I don't know. I'm not sure that the planning board has worked out a specific process and procedure for handling conservation restrictions, because they seem rather new at it. I don't think they're quite as used as this board, which has seen a multitude of them just in my short service.
They are depending on us, to put it gently.
The current chairman of the planning board is a former member of the Conservation Commission. I would think he would have some sensitivity to, I think he was a former chair of the Conservation Commission for that matter, as well, and be somewhat sensitive to that situation. As I recall, you wrote a memo to the planning board addressed to him, indicating that it would appear that there were jurisdictional wetlands within the project. Am I?
No, not within the proposed,
Yeah.
not within the proposed residential development.
But the rest of it?
Oh, all throughout the golf course.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, there's vernal pool habitat, there's bordering vegetated wetlands, I think there's intermittent streams, and of course then there's the freshwater ponds that have been utilized for irrigation.
Well, does this conservation restriction purport to only deal with the developed part of it, or the golf course part of it, or both?
Do not interpret this as a smart answer, but where they haven't included a plan depicting
Right.
the areas of proposed restriction, that begs the question as to exactly where and what specific areas this restriction would apply to.
And in your email today,
Yeah, but it does give the impression by referring to 76 out of 89 acres.
Right.
It's-
But one of town council's
But
first comments
I agree.
was that the acreage didn't add up to what
Yeah.
supposedly the total property is.
That's
So,
and the request for a current plan is
right.
what you had,
Well,
one of your
Oh.
recommendations.
yeah, well, when you research what type of requirements the
You
state
need the current
has
plan.
for making a conservation restriction become perpetual, one of the requirements is that you have a plan expressing metes and bounds and clearly depicting the restricted areas, and
Yeah.
so that you then have the context of when you read about allowed uses, prohibited uses, and where potential development may be allowed to occur in the future, you know what those areas are, and then you also know the areas that currently are unaltered and undeveloped, and whether those have permanent restrictions over them, or whether some of the allowed uses are able to intrude into those areas.
Strikes me off the top of my head that the planning board ought to delegate the process of reviewing the draft conservation restriction and finalizing it to our satisfaction, whether they approve or disapprove of it, since it deals with, matters under our jurisdiction and not under theirs.
That could be a specific comment addressed to them as a suggestion.
See if Doug agrees with that. Probably have to be chairman to chairman.
Yeah.
Letter, but anyway, any further thoughts at this time on that subject? We can always take it up afterwards if we need to do anything more.
Well, I think we've initially covered that, and probably we should go to the first agenda item.
Yeah.
This is the legal ad here. 7:45.
Mr. Marsh and family, you're welcome to move up to the front row. This is a legal notice for the Raleigh Conservation Commission in accordance with the Wetlands Protection Act, Massachusetts General Law 131, Section 40, as amended in the Town of Raleigh Wetlands Protection Bylaw. A public hearing will be held on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012, at 7:45 at Town Hall Annex located at 39 Central Street to consider a request for determination of applicability application filed by Thomas L. Marsh for a proposed tree cutting and removal possibly within the 100-foot buffer zone of an intermittent stream and bordering vegetated wetlands at 245 and 255 Newbury Road, map 1, parcels 26 and 27 in Raleigh, Massachusetts. Do you have a memo out on this one?
No,
Okay,
we have no memos this evening.
Alrighty. Would you like to summarize where we're at, or request?
I would actually suggest for the commission that the applicant address the commission and explain his
Application.
proposed project to the commission, and then we can.
Sure, so in the RDA, there's several relevant exhibits. They are exhibits A, B, and J, which outline the location of 20 trees, almost entirely softwood white pines, and it outlines their proximity to the closest structure, which would be imperiled by them. They range in caliper at 4 feet above the flare from 10 inches to 36 inches. And as stated, with the exception of one 6-inch caliber oak limb and one 7-inch ash that's leaning at about a 30-degree angle, and one ash which is deceased, all of them are white pines. 73 or fewer feet closer to the nearest structure. Mr. Bazelak was out yesterday to view the specimens in question and to also review the canopy which would remain post-felling and bucking, and I believe was comfortable with what would remain. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that was my impression.
Thank you. Brad?
Yes, for the commission, just if I may, just a verbal overview. We recently had another application from Mr. Marsh for work off of the southern end of the dwelling in that area, which borders an intermittent stream channel, which flows basically in a westerly direction from underneath Newbury Road and heading to, I think it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation's forest land, I think. It's in back of you.
I don't know that it enters into that. it enters in a butter's property. I don't know that it enters the Commonwealth's property.
According to the wetlands overlay, it shows it going into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts property. It may disperse into the forested wetlands that's there. We weren't mapping the channel, but anyway, that's the resource area, and the work is proposed in the 100-foot buffer zone to that water course. And yes, when I visited the property with Mr. Marsh the other day, the purpose of my visit was not so much to look at the trees being removed, but to evaluate that there were trees going to be left with the canopy that would still provide some shade and basically not allow desiccation to occur to the ground from the wholesale removal of the tree canopy. Although, again, that wasn't necessarily a criteria to evaluate this proposal, but since the Wetlands Protection Act is protective of vegetation, we usually like to have vegetative cover still established, and it's good to have some trees there with a canopy still shading the ground and providing some relief from bright sunshine throughout the day, holding the moisture, especially with the stream channel there, which right now is, of course, dry due to the relatively dry conditions that we've experienced through most of the summer. So I proposal to the commission, since we've recently dealt with another application with relatively proposed large-scale tree removals, that no stumping, no soil disturbance is part of this project proposal from Mr. Marsh. So there is removal of the trees, because basically all the tree removal is within developed and utilized portions of his property. And so therefore I propose that the commission adopt special conditions that we utilized recently in 230 Weathersfield Street, except we eliminate any of the allowed stumping that had been expressed in those conditions, and still maintain our basic conditions of, if appropriate, erosion control be utilized, but there are no slopes on this property for this site at all, so I'd still like to keep that in there with the if appropriate, just in case, but not necessarily hold the applicant to having to install any erosion control. And also the requirement, since this is in our municipal water supply protection district, to require a spill containment kit beyond the site. And it was also expressed to me that all of these trees slated for removal are not necessarily intended to have this happen all at once, due to considerations of either cost or timing of the project as it develops. So this may go on for a while, which of course doesn't really affect our specific conditions at all. So, any other commissioners have any questions or
Yes.
comments about that?
My only question is, does this permit stump grinding if the applicant so wishes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That, yes, that was included in, do you want me to read the conditions for?
I don't need to,
Is it?
if anyone else wants to. Are you aware of them?
Only vaguely, because I was in attendance at that meeting, but
I'd be happy to read them if you'd like to.
I think I'm comfortable with the no stumping, but stump grinding permissible with spill containment kit. Although I may ask Mr. Bazelak for specificity with respect to that, lest there be self-removal of any of these trees. I would like to make sure I'm in compliance with that.
Oh, okay, sure.
Any commissioners have any questions? Any members of the audience have any questions?
These trees, 5, 6, 7, and 8,
Yes.
how tall are they? They're pretty tall, eh? Because I'm just wondering.
I would estimate them to be
80 footers?
about 80 feet.
Yeah.
The caliper can be determined empirically, the height would be much
Yeah.
more of an estimate, which
Yeah.
is why I chose to go with caliper.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, normally they're about 80 feet around here.
And they're 20 feet from the structure, that's the,
Yeah, that's
right.
all I needed to know.
Gotta get the leaner down before that hurricane hits next one, Tuesday and Wednesday.
So in regards to a recommendation for the commission, if the commission so wishes, this would seem appropriate to be a determination of applicability with negative option number 3. It wouldn't have a detrimental impact to the resource areas if conducted with the conditions that we've crafted for tree removal operations that we've had experience with recently. So it would be option number 3, negative determination would be my recommendation to the commission.
Hear a motion to that effect?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? That went a little faster.
Thank you. There's nothing that precludes me coming back, should I wish to undertake selective stumping in the future, I could come back and seek that separately. It's not my intention to at this point, but I could come back.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That would be great.
I will be mailing it to you.
Oh, so we don't need to wait for this.
Mm.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's the legal ad for this next item.
It's a legal notice in accordance with the Wetlands Protection Act, Massachusetts General Law 131, Section 40, as amended in the Town of Rowley Wetlands Protection Bylaw. Public hearing will be held on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012, at 8 p.m. at the Town Hall Annex located at 39 Central Street to consider a request for determination of applicability application filed by Earl C. Beasley for proposed mowing of vegetation, including brush and saplings possibly within the 100-foot buffer zone of bordering vegetated wetlands in the 200-foot riverfront area of the Mill River at 470 Weathersfield Street, map 11, parcel 1, lot 3 in Rowley, Massachusetts.
Mr. Beasley, I believe you're present. Would you care
Yes.
to address the commission and explain
well-
your request?
The request is to mow an area that's somewhat, I think it's approximately an acre of the rear portion of our property, which is basically meadow, but now has numerous weed bushes, I guess you'd call them, growing up in it. And we're trying to keep them from taking over the growth in that area, to keep it a meadow. Otherwise, I used to use our own property in the western part of the state, and we let a meadow go for about 10 years, and there was no going in there. It came up in saplings and good-sized trees, and you could not mow it. So therefore, I'm requesting that we mow it this year. It's well after the fledging of the birds and so forth. I am going to hire a gentleman by the name of Art Page, whom you probably know. It's a local farmer, I guess, to have him use a bush hog to cut it, not short, but just to, particularly to get the brush. And that's basically the request. And the area's been delineated on the drawing, and it actually is an area which we did, I think, 2 to 3 years ago in the same manner. And now the bushes are coming back up in the same area, so therefore we're requesting to do it again.
Right, any thoughts, perspectives?
Sure, thank you. And apologies for not crafting a memo on this, but site visits requiring my time yesterday were totally unexpected. So that being said, this property was originally part of a multi-lot subdivided parcel extending down to the Mill River Bridge, where Weathersfield Street crosses the Mill River, and starting just a slight distance west of where Hillside Street intersects Weathersfield Street. Previously, when I first started working in town, this was being farmed and tilled for the production of corn. When I came, the commission dealt with a developer who had portioned various lots. This particular section of the property, the construction activities were outside of any areas regulated by the commission under the Wetlands Protection Act or the Town of Raleigh's Wetlands Protection Bylaw. There is 200-foot riverfront area, and that is one of the resource areas where this proposed activity would be in. But I've also included for the commission's edification the fact that the development of this parcel and the parcels to either side of it have changed the drainage and runoff characteristics. And actually directly behind Mr. Beasley's house, which is shown as a proposed swale area, again, that was outside of the commission's jurisdiction, but the development of the property appears to have concentrated the runoff, because what has resulted is there is now bordering vegetated wetlands directly behind the developed yard portion of Mr. Beasley's property. It basically is this area that can be indicated by the fact that it shows a different texture in the aerial photo. And as part of my evaluation in where Mr. Beasley had hung flagging, plastic flagging to indicate the extent of the mowing, I actually went to each of the 5 different flags that appear directly behind his, well, not exactly directly, but at the furthest extent of proposed mowing behind the dwelling, and soil augured to see what the soil characteristics were. And at 4 of the 5 flag locations extending all across the width of his property, that location, 4 feet off of where he had hung the flags, there was indications of hydric characteristics to the soil. In other words, the soil chemistry and morphology had been changed due to the saturation of groundwater, and it would be delineated as being bordering vegetated wetlands supported by hydric soils that indicate groundwater seasonally for part of the year within 12 inches at least minimum of the surface. And so the question before the commission tonight, or one of the concerns I was hoping to talk with you and address, was whether you would wish to see the mowing occur right at the edge of what could potentially be delineated bordering vegetated wetlands. Now, this is in the context that this is just proposed mowing. There's no soil disturbance. I'm going to suggest to the commission that, as in the past with resource areas that have been, property owners have proposed to do vegetation management, that we consider a requirement that it only that the mowing only occur annually or can even be considered usually once every 2 years, although this is a 3-year permit. So basically, within the life of the permit, the proposal would be to have mowing occur within the first year, skip the second year, and then occur within the last year before the permit expires. Also, as past practice, due to the fact that ground nesting birds which utilize this grassland habitat may nest and not have their fledglings actually, or their young not fledged by mid-August, to seasonally restrict the mowing to only occur from the last week of August on into October, which is usually actually the best time of year based on dry soil characteristics to do mowing. Other than that, that particular area is really the only area where the mowing comes right up to the edge of bordering vegetated wetlands. At the other end of Mr. Beasley's property, where the Mill River and its floodplain and beaver activity has been taking place, I checked distances down there, and the closest proximity to actually bordering vegetated wetlands was 20 feet, with an average of anywhere from 30 feet to 40 feet, where in some cases maximum distance was 55 feet at 4 different points that I actually investigated. Now that does put the mowing within the 200-foot riverfront area, which actually extends probably 150 feet out into the field, the area proposed to be mowed. But the first 0 to 100 feet of riverfront is the riparian area, which is specifically identified as having wildlife habitat characteristics, and with a restriction on not substantially altering or changing so that you don't degrade those habitat characteristics. Because of the past mowing activity and past harvesting activity, this proposal to mow this field does not appear that it would have a detrimental impact. And in fact, I saw numerous signs that there were wildlife trails and corridors through the field grass at that end of the field. I found one burrow big enough to take my hiking boot into it. Wasn't quite exactly how I found it, but it was a good sized burrow, showing that there is wildlife utilizing the habitat back there, which is always a good thing. And something very big jumped into the water while I was down there too.
My neighborhood seen another beaver.
Beavers.
Big muskrats.
No, it was large. I scared something large because it was a very substantive splash into the water. That so I startled something that was at least over 20 or 30 pounds. So
Otter too.
that could be a beaver. So anyway, so if the commission so wishes, I would suggest that possible conditions include no soil disturbance, that Mr. Page or whoever Mr. Beasley chooses as being his person operating a tractor have a spill containment kit because of the nearby water resources that are there. And as I mentioned, time restrictions and also a periodic restriction that would be put into place. And other than that, again, the activity doesn't seem to be totally out of character with the activity that the commission has permitted before. And as Mr. Beasley mentioned, there was an existing permit 3 to 4 years ago that was utilized for the mowing of the quote-unquote historic cornfield as a vegetation management activity that the commission had allowed through another order of conditions to the developer who was undertaking construction of a lot of these homes.
When we approved this lot, was there a no cut, no disturb
We-
area designated?
We never were involved in, this lot never came before us in needing an order of conditions because the development of the lot was all outside of regulated areas. So no, in the past, there has not been prescribed a specific no-cut, no disturbance area.
Is your neighbor the place where the state policeman parks his car, or is that two houses away?
Say again?
Two houses.
That's
Two houses
That's
down.
here.
Okay, thank you.
You can see from,
Unfortunately, you can see from the aerial photographs, though, that the abutting property to the west has unfortunately apparently converted the field into turf grass, which is an issue that the commission may wish to address separately, since that is an activity that was never permitted in the development of that property.
Comments, observations by any of the commissioners?
This area here, right?
That's the area on Mr. Beasley's property that's proposed to be mowed.
Right. It has the same characteristics as this, but is it wet?
No. It does not evidence a predominance of what we would call wetlands, obligate or facultative wet plant species.
Any other questions?
That, this area that the drainage is occurring in, that's a natural depression mostly, isn't it?
Well, because of the way, it didn't start out that way. Because of the way fill was deposited for the development of these houses,
Right.
and the proposed plans show the contours forming a swale to bring water down here. Now, then this showed that there was supposedly a loam stockpile, but as far as we know, and to Mr. Beasley's best recollection, there was never a
Okay.
soil stockpile at the back of the property, but
Yeah.
either way, the water has naturally sought, it's been concentrated here because of the development of the frontage, and then it sought the lowest point for its flow going down here, and it works its way into what had been the hedgerow between the fields,
Yeah.
which had been flagged a long time ago as bordering vegetated wetlands,
Right.
working its way up here. So now what's happened is the concentrating of the water here and the soil characteristics has held it, and so it is generated sustained groundwater, which the plant community has taken advantage of. It's been an inadvertent wetlands replication where wetlands wasn't there before, so.
I understand that aspect of it. I was wondering whether there actually was any physical change to that during the construction process that caused that to be lower. Apparently not.
Well, that property, the whole property banks down to the middle river.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
If you're
That's-
here, there
this
is
is
a natural grade
But the other,
contour to it, so it is a lower portion of it.
I
Just
can
ever so slightly.
tell you from my soil auguring that the soils were not of a characteristic that I would have classified as being well drained to begin with. And this may have just tipped the equation enough, sustaining groundwater relatively near the surface, that it's drawn that particular various types of plant species, including cattails and,
Phragmites.
there's sedges and
Yeah.
some rush in there too, so mostly sedges.
But the intention is to mow the whole thing.
Yeah, well, not actually mow this area of developed wetlands, but mow up to the edge of it, where it transitions to more,
So it's gonna
Dry.
cross it and not it to mow it.
I'm sorry?
It's going to cross that and not it to mow it.
Yes, well, right now, he actually accesses it by the neighbors allowing him to walk around
Oh, okay,
where the swale
Okay.
was extended up to his side.
okay.
You understand what Brent's talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Are you comfortable with his recommendations?
I am, as if we can mow that area we've requested to mow.
as he indicated.
Yes.
All right, any other comments by any audience members? Camera crew? Making sure you're awake over there. All right. You're looking for a motion then?
So if the commission so chooses, my recommendation would be to consider issuing a determination of applicability, be it a negative determination, option number 3, with the conditions that I reviewed.
Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Unanimous?
Okay?
Okay.
Very good. I'll be mailing you your permit in a few days.
Okay. Now, the permit is in place. I do have a comment. This area, which is now being declared wetland, was not that when we bought the property. In fact, it was covered with snow, and there were no cattails growing there. That was 4 years ago. The area there, I have a Google aerial photograph of the site prior to development, and it appears that there was a spring under my neighbor's house that is contributing to the land there. That swale was done by the contractor, I think, in order to provide drainage primarily for the adjacent property. There's actually, in the spring anyway, there is an active spring there, a little spring and water coming out.
Is the house to the west of you?
Yeah, to the, let's see, yeah, to the west. And there's considerable amount of water coming from the adjacent property onto the property there, which there's nothing we can do about because it's natural. The fact that the contractor didn't continue the swale farther down has caused the water to, quote, back up in that area. Albeit, and it can be defined at great cost as wetland or not wetland. I don't want to go through that process. I'm not trying to develop the property. I'm just trying to maintain its use and not be further restricted in its use. I'm very uncomfortable about half of it being, requiring a permit to use it at all, excluding motor vehicles, etc. But the property to our east is actually lying within the 200-foot anyway, and people are not required to pull permits to mow their lawns, and they're allowed to continue to have their lawns. I just feel that I'm uncomfortable about the process, and if we do nothing, somebody could say, well, now you've got the wetlands here. Now you're not going to be able to touch your yard between your house and the wetlands because there's a borderline vegetation and all that stuff. And I'm very concerned about it, and would like to see some means of assuring us that that's not going to happen. And I don't know what that means.
That what's not going to happen?
That it's not going to be declared full wetlands and go through the whole, and I'm not an expert on such things. I'm a mechanical engineer, a professional mechanical engineer in Massachusetts. I don't know hydrology that well. I've been on enough job sites to see where water's coming out of the ground and know that what we have down there is clay all the way to the river. And I suspect, because I actually have seen a Google photograph of the site with large earth-moving equipment, that the developer took the topsoil. And all we have down there is clay. Fortunately, the meadow grows in clay fine, but nothing else is gonna grow down there. I would just like to, put that before the board for consideration, that this not be considered wetland, that it, or if necessary, get an exemption from the board to be able to. Now, what's happening there now, we have cattails, but this year, we have had an invasion of Phragmites. Next year, it'll be all Phragmites. And it'll go on down to the river.
Brent, your thoughts on that?
I can't
Well,
technically do anything.
there's a few things that are being mixed here, which I don't know if Mr. Beasley understands fully. He's mixed using the noun lawn with field. You submitted a proposal to us to mow what most folks would describe as being a field, not a lawn area that's
No,
associated
I don't
with a dwelling.
intend that this will be a field. I
Well,
mean,
but-
that
but
it
your-
will be a lawn.
But your discussion,
Yeah.
you mixed using the word lawn, and you talked about people's lawns being restricted from being mowed.
Oh,
And
mine.
that's not,
No,
and
no.
that's not what has happened here.
Okay, no, let me
Number
say
one.
this. Let me finish then.
Yeah.
It just appears to me that things on my property are changing. It's not what I bought. I did not buy a wetland. I did not intend to buy a wetland, and had I known I was buying a wetland, I wouldn't have bought a wetland. When you look at the property, it's all been developed in the last 5 or 6 years. I'm sure that the Conservation Commission took a very good look at the entire site, and that area was not declared as wetlands at that time, and therefore I feel very uncomfortable about Mr. Blaislick defining it as wetland now. It's threatening. That's what I'm saying.
Mr. Chairman, may I have the opportunity to finish my thoughts, which include that? First off, the commission was asked through your application to determine whether the work depicted on the plans referenced below is subject to the Wetlands Protection Act, and secondly, whether the area and/or work depicted on the plans referenced below is subject to the jurisdiction of any municipal ordinance or bylaw, which would be the Town of Raleigh's Wetlands Protection Bylaw. Commission, in this instance, specifically evaluated your activity of mowing. The Commission and I have not made a recommendation to the Commission to declare anything, be it a specific resource area. I said that my field investigation showed, based on my analysis of the soil and the plant species, that there were the characteristics present that we use to evaluate whether something is bordering vegetated wetlands or whether it isn't, and that's defined under the law and the regulations. There's been no declaration about any specific area being bordering vegetated wetlands in this application. We just mentioned, I mentioned, that as the result of my field investigation, I saw the criteria that indicated that.
That's
And
exactly.
the commission made a decision
That's
to allow mowing to occur up to those points.
That's why I
where you
waited
would hung the
until
flags.
the board made the decision. This is a separate
Right.
discussion, because that was mentioned. It's a threat, in my opinion, to the use of my property. I've already lost, I'm already unable to really get full benefit of the acre of my property that lies between the house and the river. I have to come to you for a 3-year permit in order to keep the vegetation in check. Now, in this discussion, there was mention of borderline wetlands. I didn't say it, he said it. That's what I consider a threat. Because if you establish that as borderline wetlands, or if it is established as wetlands, then you have to have a borderline around it, and now you're coming up into my yard.
So, first of all, there's nothing here that's threatening. it might be threatening from a standpoint that you are the property owner and you're afraid that something like this could
Yes,
materialize.
yes,
But secondly, to have that delineated, that would have to be you would have to have that delineated if you're afraid of something like that.
Mhm.
We're not gonna do that. He's not
Okay.
gonna do that.
okay,
In his investigation only, he saw the characteristics that deem it, in his mind, as a scientist, that it is wet soils.
mhm,
We need to know that because we have to decide on how to approach your
right,
request.
right,
Only that.
that's it, okay.
Something that may or may not be helpful here is, I understand your concern. It's possible that you might want to think about over the winter filing a request for determination of applicability as to transporting that water that comes off of that spring area that you're talking about in a way that goes further down your property and comes out closer to the river or beyond the area we're talking about mowing here, which should take some of the water off of there. That whole side of Weathersfield Street that you're on is not only impacted by what has happened with regard to development and probably more substantially by the beaver activity that had that whole area flooded significantly at one or two points along the way before the beavers temporarily disappeared. But on the other side of Weathersfield Street, you've got significant high-rise land, and the water pressure coming off of that and going under the street is contributing and is probably the major pressure points with regard to the water
Right.
on your side of the street.
Yeah. Further, the way those properties were probably managed when they were being constructed might not have been the best in your benefit, or whoever
Right.
the owner would be. I've been on the green property, next to the police officer, adjacent to him,
Mhm,
and I've seen that it has a natural swale to it.
mhm,
That isn't in your favor in this particular case,
mhm.
And because you're concerned with this, you might want to investigate or have it investigated or delineated by a wetlands professional to just take care of your concerns,
Mhm.
It probably wouldn't go in his favor.
Well, probably would not.
But I have to say here, at the end of the day, this is an environmental regulatory board.
Mhm.
We approach the property and look at the characteristics that are happening on the ground. Those characteristics, if they meet the criteria of the regulations, nature is dynamic. Nature is always changing.
Mhm.
The fact that man's development may concentrate and change flow patterns and drainage patterns across the terrain and the real estate is just, it's a fact of life. That's what happens. If the plant community responds to a different regimen of water availability and soil characteristics, that's what happens. No one here makes that happen. No one serving on this board has the capacity to even predict what is sometimes going to happen on properties based on development. But we do have a set of criteria established in regulations and also a fairly good scientific background that's been developed both by the Army Corps of Engineers through their promulgation of the Clean Water Act that establishes what wetlands plant community is and what the soil characteristics are that define that. So it's science-based. If your property is experiencing changes in its plant community and its soil characteristics, that's just nature occurring. And if it happens to meet the regulatory criteria for protection, that's what was established by this Commonwealth as being of a benefit to the citizens and a protection of the natural resources of the Commonwealth, which provide functions and interests that they deem to be in need of regulation and protection, if you want to phrase it that way. But that's how it is. It's nothing that this board or their staff is predisposed to quote-unquote seeking out. We just go onto the property and evaluate the characteristics that are there.
And as Kurt said, it probably, if you decided to have that delineated, it probably would not go in your favor.
Say again?
It probably would not go in your favor because of the characteristics that Brent has seen based on his investigation. Things have changed, probably because of the contours of the property and the adjacent properties. There's nothing we can do about that.
Well, other than the fact that I don't know how Brent feels about this, I can't say how the board feels about it, but I do think that we could consider and entertain another determination of applicability with regard to doing something as to the transport of the water coming off of that spring area.
Absolutely.
And
I think I advised Mr. Beasley that he could seek out the services of a wetlands consultant with the thought in mind that, that maybe there was a possibility of addressing what was going on with the drainage there, that either control it or manipulate it or do something. But again, it needs to just be approached from a fact-based standard as to what the conditions there on the ground are and what the regulations would possibly support for.
And my interpretation or understanding of what Brent said earlier in the meeting is that there are characteristics leading towards the possibility of a wetlands delineation there, but it may not be fully developed, and in any event, with a wetlands consultant, you may be able to work out something that may take some of that water away from that area so that you might be able to, use it as lawn in the future, or even brush hogging it.
In short, time is of the essence. You've seen it change. He's got facts that it probably has changed. You might want to mitigate that water or do something to at least alleviate the problem. The only way you're going to do that is to have that investigated by a wetland specialist or somebody that can look at things like that and knows the regulations, knows how to come up against the board like this and come up with an idea to help you with this problem, a potential problem.
I hope that discussion's been useful in expanding upon your concerns.
Well, it's been very disconcerting.
Well,
I fully understand it. I appreciate hearing it from all of you and not just from Brent. I would like to say, too, that I appreciate very much the work that Brent has done. You are, I'm sure, very much aware of the flooding problem we had there and the fact that we had to remove beavers from the site. And he was extremely helpful with that. He actually physically came out and helped after we had the permit to breach the dam, to do the breaching, which is above and beyond the call.
well, thank you for sharing that information. Brent has a history of doing that kind of thing around the town, and he's pretty consistent in that way. And I hope he won't be needed to wrestle beavers in the future, but it sounds like they're coming back.
Yeah, they are.
So I'm sure he'd be available for the same thing.
I will forward my neighbors. Well, my neighbor has identified one already out back there. But it's above the area that was of primary concern, so it may not be something we can do anything about.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Would, should I, will you mail a permit?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And can I talk to Art at this time and
Yes.
tell him that sometime next week?
Maybe have him give me a call.
Okay, great. All right. All right.
Have a good evening.
Interesting situation. Yeah.
Brings us to our 8:15 meeting.
Mr. Moore, do you have the ad with you?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
I assume that Well, I don't know, Shirley, a male or a female?
Female.
Can you vote? Let me read the public notice. Legal notice of the Raleigh Conservation Commission in accordance with the Wetlands Protection Act, Massachusetts General Law 131, Section 40 is amended in the Town of Raleigh Wetlands Protection Bylaw. A public meeting will be held on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012 at 8:15 at room 5 of the Town Hall Annex at 39 Central Street to consider a request for determination of applicability application filed by Shirley Brown for proposed site grading, tree cutting, and removal possibly within the 100-foot buffer zone of bordering vegetated wetlands and a stream at 232 Weathersfield Street, map 23, parcel 14, lot 1 in Raleigh, Massachusetts.
Good evening. For the record, my name is John Moore, and I work for the Navy Mooring Group. We're here tonight representing Shirley Brown for a request for determination of applicability for her property located at 232 Weathersfield Street. I did bring a revised plan tonight. Our client last week had us make a minor modification to the plan. The modification is actually work that's outside the buffer, but I wanted to bring the plan and review it as part of the application tonight. It doesn't change the scope of the work located within the buffer zone. I got 8 copies, and if anyone wants their own, I can print the rest. What we're here for tonight, Lot 2, or 232 Weathersfield Street, was a lot created from an A&R application this past summer. We did soil testing out on the site with the Board of Health last year, and that's when we proceeded forward with the actual A&R plan to subdivide the lot. At the rear of the lot, there is an intermittent stream that has bordering vegetated wetlands. That's actually shown in green on this plan. And actually on the opposite side of Weathersfield Street, or the easterly side of Weathersfield Street, there's another bordering vegetated wetland that's actually receiving runoff from the shoulder of Weathersfield Street via an existing 10-inch metal culvert. There is no wetland vegetation up on this side, so we've got a bordering vegetated wetland on the easterly side of Weathersfield Street, 100-foot buffer zone right here in green, and then we've got the bordering vegetated wetlands at the rear of the property with an intermittent stream that it borders.
Is that ox pasture?
Yes.
What's the name of that?
No, it's not ox pasture. It's unnamed, I believe.
What, this brook?
The brook.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's unnamed.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Right.
It's not named on any USGS.
Yeah, it's not shown on any of them.
It goes underneath what it goes down, and at the entrance to the Wild Pastures project, it goes underneath Weathersfield Street and starts heading towards your basement, Kurt.
You're on the south side of Weathersfield Street, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, no, we're on the westerly side of Weathersfield Street, in the location that we're in.
That's all this way? That brook? It is a brook? I mean,
It's a
Yes.
intermittent stream.
it isn't.
Yeah, it's intermittent, it's not perennial. The locust map's probably the easiest way. You know, here's Weathersfield coming in, Route 1's here, Weathersfield Street coming in, Green Needle Lane, we're almost across the street from Green Needle, heading back towards Route 1.
At that point, Weathersfield Street is basically proceeding north-south, so they're on
Exactly.
on the westerly side. On the Ox Pasture Lane side of the street.
Is that where that garage is located on?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
This is the subdivision of the place that we looked at
Yes,
last.
yes, with the tree cutting,
Okay.
yes.
I was about to get to that. On this property is the existing garage.
Right.
What our client's proposing, and here with me tonight is Kevin Brown, Shirley Brown's son. We're proposing the construction of a garage and then a construction of a house that would be attached to the existing garage. Driveway coming in off of Weathersfield Street, utilities coming in off of Weathersfield Street, proposed deck at the rear of the proposed dwelling, and septic system. All of this work is outside the 100-foot buffer associated with the wetlands to the rear. Again, there's no proposed work within the 100-foot buffer of the wetlands out in the front. We do have grading associated with the septic system at the rear of the property. And that's the only work that we've got proposed within the buffer zone with grading work. And we're proposing hay bales backed with filter fabric due to the existing slope that's out here. We do have grades that exceed 15%. So instead of just proposing silt fence or just hay bales, we're proposing silt fence with hay bales. The other part of this application is, as with 230 Weathersfield Street, there's a large majority of 90-foot to 120-foot pines that exist out on this property. And Mr. Brown had he had flagged the pines out on the site that he was proposing to take down, select pines. These pines would only be cut, they'd be dropped on the property, left on the property. We're not proposing to take any of them out of there. Obviously, the trees that are being removed upslope of the erosion control will be stumping and removing those, but anything beyond the erosion control, the select tree cutting, those trees would be dropped in the buffer zone and left there, and the stumps would also be left. We wouldn't be stumping any of those. One of the aspects, as you know, under your bylaw or under your local regulations is there's a stormwater management bylaw and erosion control bylaw, and it's tripped by certain thresholds of alteration. And what you see in red here is the proposed alteration for the project. And you're looking at 18,860 square feet. Under the bylaw, it talks about exceeding or falling under the threshold if you exceed 20,000 square feet. One of the other criteria is if you exceed more than 10,000 square feet of slopes exceeding 15%. What you see here in the darker greenish color, these are areas of slopes that are greater than 15% that we're proposing to alter. Those total up to 6,530 square feet. So we're below the 10,000 square foot threshold for that part of the application process as well. So we did not file a stormwater.
Just for a second.
Sure.
That 18,000 square feet excludes the area where you're talking about felling all those pine trees, right?
Yes.
So if you add that in, you're over 20,000.
It's triggered by soil disturbance.
That's what I was
The felling of the trees
Okay.
Should not.
is not going to allow stumpage, and so therefore it will not be soil disturbance.
Right.
This is in addition to the tree felling that we approved on the adjacent lot.
This is a separate request for this lot because
Right.
unbeknownst to myself, and I don't think that Joe Witt knew what the exact timing was of the recording of the lot. And
Right.
so therefore, that lot got created just a few days before he submitted the application for 230. So nothing that we talked about in terms of tree clearing or that is governed by that permit extended to this lot because this lot became standalone prior to the submittal of that application.
Okay, thank you.
So with regards to the structures, the erosion control, closest point to the erosion control to the wetland line is 70 feet. There's no natural heritage on this property, no endangered species habitat of any sort. Again, hay bales backed with filter fabric for erosion control. Closest corner from the proposed deck to the wetland edge is 103 feet. Closest corner of the proposed structure to the wetland, you're looking at about 112 feet. The change in the plan that's before you tonight versus the plan that was submitted, this configuration, the house and deck configuration, slid to the north. It was actually about 10 feet closer this way. By sliding it to the north, we actually moved the deck further from the wetlands than what was shown on the original plan. I believe if you look at that original plan, I think the deck was shown 101 feet to the wetland. So what's happening is we're actually moving the work further away from the wetland in that location. And the house really didn't change based on its closest point. It's still from that wetland flag 101. It's still well beyond the 100-foot buffer.
Couple of random questions. You're gonna be sharing a common driveway with the house closer to town?
This configuration right here?
Yeah. So you don't have a curb cut on the applicant's property here, right?
No, we will have a curb cut over here.
Okay.
We're still just maintaining the existing access to the garage.
That's
From-
that's pre-existing, there's
Correct.
pre-existing pavement
Okay.
to get into the pre-existing garage attached structure that was there.
Planning on, what plans might there be with regard to that existing pavement?
Well, right now, we still need the access to get, most likely, this will just stay. And the reason for that is there's a garage bay on this structure here. There's no way to access it coming across this direction. I mean, you'd be doing an awful lot of disturbance along there to get that driveway in from this existing curb cut, more than you'd gain by taking this piece out.
Okay, I just was wondering whether you were planning on ripping that out at some point. I may be wrong on this, but my recollection in driving past this area frequently is on this side of the garage, there was a large chunk of soil excavated and huge boat is parked in there. And that's
Yeah.
not shown on
Yeah,
the,
yeah, it is
If you look at
actually.
the topography, you can actually, we did our topography after that was done. You can see where that area is, it's right here.
okay. So it's off your property.
Right.
All right. My recollection was that it was closer to the garage, but, okay, thanks for all the clarification.
The tree felling, that's gonna happen somewhere after the river bound or brook bound of the 50 contour, correct?
Yeah, exactly, it's all through in this area right in here. Like I stated, we've got pine trees over 120 feet tall in that location. And as with the pine that actually dropped a limb through this house, a lot of these pines are suffering the same fate that some of those are. And that's why Mr. Brown actually flagged a bunch of those trees to have Brent come out and review them.
The same fate, for the record, is ant problems.
Right.
That seems to be, that's the unknown factor, because there's no real way to ascertain which of those trees has been structurally compromised by the activity of the carpenter ants and which hasn't. And so they're all kind of suspect.
How many trees you talking?
I don't know, I'm gonna propose the same requirements which will require that I go out there and evaluate and go over each of the trees and its aspect to the proposed structures, et cetera, but, so I don't have any type of tally or anything for you, but we're probably running around the same density that we had on the other side, where approximately every 50 square feet, you've got at least 2 trees within that 50 square feet.
And again, unlike the other project, however, we're just gonna drop them and leave them.
Yeah,
No, we're not, within
Well, they
the,
were mostly being dropped and left on the
Yeah,
other
on the other
ones,
side too.
Yeah,
And the stumps will just remain
yeah. It was only really up in the level area.
up in here.
right.
Yes,
Close to
yeah,
them.
Yeah.
and some on this side too,
Okay.
where the topography pretty much had leveled off and where it started its gradual slope.
Slope down towards Weathersfield Street, so.
Didn't we approve some tree cutting on the other side of the brook for the other?
Yes, we
property?
did.
Yeah.
And that
But
was
that's
just
not
being
being
dropped.
considered here.
No, because this proposed
The house is
structure
further up.
is so far away that none of the trees over here present a risk to it.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, Brent, but looking at this for the sake of convenience, sometime back, person who owns a house down about there complained about all of the wetland drainage and increasing flow through his property and possibly endangering it. Was as a result of building activity in the general area, and that may well include wild pasture, I don't remember, but you remember that
Actually,
complaint?
yeah, it's the gentleman who owns the property right on the same side of the street as Wild Pastures entrance, but is on exactly the opposite side of this particular water course,
Yeah.
which finally goes underneath Weathersfield. Now, part of the context of that is that, first off, everyone in this country is allowed to have an opinion.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that that opinion was well-researched or had any, any hydrological study or stormwater or drainage analysis behind it. And in fact, investigating the permitting for that particular property revealed that that person sought the permission of the Conservation Commission at the time, I think it was 1985 or 1986, and built their house within the 100-foot buffer zone to bordering vegetated wetlands and within 100 feet of the bank of that intermittent stream channel. And in fact, I think the closest point of their structure, if I remember from scaling it, and forgive me, this is just by memory, my recollection was that it was within 50 feet. Corner of his house, and his property had no appreciable topographic relief on the house. I don't think at the time there was an understanding of floodplains, because I'm sure if there had been a discussion, the record revealed absolutely nothing about the floodplain to that particular stream channel, and I believe if that had been investigated, it would have been found that he was actually proposing to build his structure very close to where the edge of the floodplain would have been prescribed. But again, that was ancient history, and yes, that opinion was, but I remember that specifically because I was asked to investigate as to whether there was something going on. And of course, all the projects that the commission has recently permitted that we were aware of that had any type of possible contributory influence of stormwater to that water course, the only one that came out was Wild Pastures, and they had absolutely no problems in the 2006 Mother's Day event or the 2010 flooding event. Their stormwater management system performed exactly as it was supposed to and retained water, didn't have any blowouts even though it was under construction and just very recently configured. And so I could not find any development that was possibly suspect in contributing excessive water to that drainage channel. It was just all the streams flooded.
No, I remember that.
And there was some obstruction, but I think, my recollection, the selectmen were the specific board that was dealing with that complaint, and I believe Scott Levitt had researched the fact that whenever that culvert going under Weathersfield Street was put in was prior to anyone doing any type of drainage analysis, and so it was one of those things that they suspected that they came up to the stream and they said, oh, the stream's this wide, so we need at least 2 pipes that are this wide, and that's what they stuck in there. It just wasn't a lot of engineering put into capacity, inverts out, all that different stuff.
Would it be correct to assume that the proposed activities here, including the tree cutting, would not contribute in any way towards drainage towards that end of the stream?
Well, you're really putting me on the spot for that one.
Well, I'm asking because the person might complain again at some point.
Now, where is their lot located? Is it on the,
Where Wild Pastures has their entrance to Weathersfield Street, so it's a significant.
now are they, but which side? Are they,
You're
So
yeah.
they're right there,
They're right
and
there.
they are right on this side. They are
Okay.
the abutting parcel. They're on the other side of where this intermittent stream channel goes underneath.
So how can you answer that question without knowing exactly how many trees are in?
Well, I can't.
Right.
I can't really answer that question.
well, one thing I
Because-
can tell the board, the commission, is that, I mean, there is a ridge line running right through the property right here, and we're
Mhm.
roughly maintaining that same ridge line. So the majority of all this work is actually heading back towards Weathersfield Street.
Now, within the context, I mean, one of the reasons why I cannot answer your question is because a lot of folks don't intuitively understand that the larger a tree is, and especially an evergreen, with the fact that it permanently maintains its needles, it has a lot of surface area. During a rain event, that surface area is covered with a film of water due to the cohesive characteristics of water molecules. And so, pardon the expression, but a soaking wet tree weighs a hell of a lot more than a dry tree because of all the water it retains. But it just retains it and slows it down. The tree cutting is not going to be, shouldn't result in soil compaction or anything else down that slope. So the absorption and infiltration characteristics of the slope shouldn't be negatively affected. The fact that the trunks of the trees and everything are going to be left on the slope will mean that they will still retain the water that forms a film around them. And in fact, as they decay, they will become even more absorbent and soak up water. There's a fair amount of sapling and young trees in the understory that will be released and grow up. So there may be a transition phase when the actual water, the first amount of precipitation that comes down that the body of the tree used to hold on its surface, there might be a time period when there's less of that water initially retained, but it should infiltrate into the ground because the soil there has got a lot of duff, which is very absorbent.
Well, we do have the soils out there where we tested 10 minutes an inch. They're not the greatest soils, but they are good soils. 10 minute per inch perk rate, loamy sand. But we dug 10 feet, 10 and a half feet, didn't hit water in any of them. So we have deep water tables out there as well. So it's not like we have a perch water table that's going to have this water running right on the top of the surface. We do have the ability, the ground has the ability to infiltrate water in that location. And again, we won't be removing the entire tree canopy out in this area.
It's actually a great, if I may I shift into some things I was going to ask in my verbal presentation as a memo, because actually two things I was going to ask for. We cannot require them, but I was going to ask if the applicant would consider two things initially. The first is infiltration of the impervious areas. We've got two new roof areas. I'm assuming the deck will have open slats, but
yes.
maybe that's an improper assumption. But I would request the strategy for infiltration of the roof runoff be considered. I was also going to ask, just so I don't have to come out to the site, that a crushed stone entrance-exit pad be utilized during the construction period for the new driveway, so that there isn't a tracking of materials, because that would be jurisdictional. That would trigger my having to come out there and not in a positive manner. So those were two requests dealing with stormwater. The third thing, if I may, which isn't a request, is I would ask you to document in a letter what you depicted on that other plan. Because when they request a building permit from me, I am going to need a letter such as that with your professional stamp attesting to what the square footages of disturbance are and the fact that this project is not triggering.
Right, and what I'll do is I'll actually provide you with that colored plan along with the narrative.
Okay, but I just, again, I don't want to slow down anything else. If I may give what I normally would have put in a memo, and that is with this proposal, which we have an intermittent stream resource area which contains bank. We have bordering vegetated wetlands, and then we have the 100-foot buffer zone to both bordering vegetated wetlands and bank. So in review of the plans, and I realize I haven't seen your revised plan, but I was going to ask you for the following revisions. I was gonna ask if the legend could not have the full specific name of the wetland resource areas expressed in it. In other words, where it says, wetlands, that it say bordering vegetated wetlands, where it says, maybe it's a 100-foot offset or something, or it's a 100-foot buffer zone to BVW, that type of thing. Okay, we already talked about the documenting of the square foot of soil disturbance. It has direction of flow been added to the stream.
Yeah,
Yep.
you and I talked, there's actually
Yep.
one here, but on the latest plan, I actually threw another directional arrow
Alright,
further
great.
down.
Well, we kind of like to have it in the lot that the plan goes.
Yep, I can,
to the permit,
not a problem.
That's all. Could you also possibly get a detail in there of the proposed erosion control, the silt fence and the straw bales, hay bales for that? And again, like I said, it's just a request that there be a crushed stone entrance exit pad for the new drive. And I would also request that dimensions appear on the building envelopes. Again, that will just be of assistance when the building permit is applied for. But I was going to suggest to the commission that the same conditions as utilized for 230 Weathersfield Street be utilized for this project because of basically the same nature of the tree cutting that would allow it to be evaluated. And then I would add to that because of the erosion control, I would add the requirements for inspection of the installed erosion control, that it be maintained in a fully functional condition throughout the project, that some additional erosion control be on the site in case it's needed, and that at the conclusion of the project, before the erosion control is removed, that it be inspected to make sure that the soils are stabilized behind it before we allow removal. Standard conditions we have in a project like this. And therefore, with that being done and the submittal of a revised plan within 14 days for review and approval, I would suggest that the commission consider a negative determination, option number 3, with the conditions we just discussed. Unless there's any other concerns from any of the commissioners.
Any other questions, thoughts?
I'm just wondering, I don't know if you normally do this, but, he's got the soil types up there. I was wondering if there could be a legend. I mean, we're packing the thing with many different,
A legend in regards to
the soil types that are...
Oh, you just want the
We could actually add
MMC
that.
being explained? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you're gonna be looking for is something, I think we did it on, oh no, we did it on a separate plan that was, the A&R application requires soils shown on that plan as well. We usually submit, we don't put the soil classifications on the A&R plan because it just screws up the attorneys when they go looking them up in the registry. So we always submit a separate plan that has all that data on it. I can take that data and just bring it back over onto this
If
plan.
it doesn't make it,
Yep.
if
It'll
might
just
be too
state,
much.
exactly what you're looking for. MMC is whatever it is for a soil, and it'll describe, I think we got 3 types of soils out there.
You got the CRD.
Yep, and then there's
I think
a,
there's a DE.
DE out in the front. So those are the 3 that make up.
Yeah.
And then we did have a separate one over on this lot, but it doesn't find its way over onto this property. But we can add those soils legend.
And I believe we already had a conversation about talking to the neighbor
Yes.
to the north, right?
Yes.
And again, not a requirement, just a suggestion, before they think they're being attacked by Paul Bunyan.
The construction apron down by Weathersfield Street, that's not a problem. If you can put that in as a condition, we'll just make sure that that's there when they.
Well, but see, it's that technically is not subject to our jurisdiction.
Right.
But from what I know from the slopes and the soils there, as soon as one of the neighbors starts seeing tracking on
Yep.
the street, they're
Then
gonna
you're
call,
called in.
and then I'm gonna have to come and say, put this in. So
Right.
I'm just making a friendly, positive suggestion that would
Yep.
be a good thing to do.
And we'll definitely do that. It'll just be a lot of less headache for the construction being done on the site, 'cause it's a lot of less cleanup.
Yeah.
You could add it, Brent, as a recommendation after your listing of conditions, so that it's
Right,
not a condition
yeah.
per se.
Yeah,
it's
but
a-
but at least it's
document.
Specifically stated as a recommendation, sure. Then I'll also state about infiltration of the roof runoff too. And again, it's just so all the impacts of the project site stay on the project site.
Mhm.
Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Brown, any thoughts?
No, I'm clear with everything that transpired. It sounds good, except one thing. Isn't that Ox Pasture Stream?
No,
It's not?
No.
That's what I was told.
no.
Okay.
Well, again, us geeks go by what the USGS labels it on their topos, and if they don't have a name there, we've got water courses in town that have all sorts of names depending
Depending
on
on
which
which
neighborhood you ask.
Locally, it could be that.
Yep.
You call it Sally, I suppose.
Okay. No other comments or questions? Do I hear a motion in accordance with Brent's recommendations?
So move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Unanimous.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Get this revised plan out to you.
Yep, thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, have a good night.
Yep.
You too?
Night, gents.
You have such a great.
Yeah, I was pushing it towards you.
Yeah, I know.
Well, you can call it that.
Yeah, we can send it out.
You're not wanting to stay up all night.
I just, somehow, I get to a certain point at night and I'm not at all thinking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry for the delay, gentlemen.
No, we're just outside talking politics. We thought we'd see what's going on in here. I'm ready to vote.
You were probably more interesting in that. Might have heard something new in here.
Perhaps.
Any announcement for read on this?
No, there's not a legal ad, this is administrative, if you wish to just read the agenda item, or...
This is the 8:30 new request for a certificate of compliance, number 63-368 for 8 Turcot Memorial Drive, map 17, parcel 20, lot 50, Richard O. Martin, trustee, ENGJ Realty Trust.
I've inspected the project, we have submitted as-built, also photo documentation of the recently constructed infiltration basin, as well as the supplemental riprap added to the southwesterly corner of the building that's closest to the resource areas, which include riverfront as well as 100-foot buffer zone bordering vegetated wetlands. And I recommend that the commission consider issuing a complete certificate of compliance with ongoing conditions. I have to go over the orders there. Ongoing conditions, numbers. Oh, yeah. Come on, I know I typed those in.
While Brent's looking for that, you gentlemen are,
I'm Rick Martin. Alan Roscoe from Hancock Associates. Just here to answer any questions if there are any.
The ongoing conditions are number 36, low nitrogen fertilizer and pesticides and herbicides are prohibited from the 100-foot buffer zone. And number 53, 55, and 56, which requires the stormwater basin be maintained in an ongoing and functional condition.
They're recommending a full and complete certificate of compliance
Yes.
with conditions.
Ongoing conditions, 36, 53, 55, 56.
Mostly the maintenance items.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure why they did the fertilizer and the pesticide herbicide thing, because most of the buffer zone development of your project is the rip-rap slope and the little corner of the parking lot, which I doubt you'd ever herbicide and pesticide, so.
Having to mow it. Keeps you from having to mow it.
You know, well, that's what I say. And what I meant on the plan, the part of the project that's in the buffer zone is,
The thing that interested me was this kind of a surrounding section, then a depression there.
yeah.
Any additional comments, concerns? Do I hear a motion for Brent's recommendation?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Unanimous?
I'm sorry, who moved in second on
I did.
that? I can't find my sheet.
I second.
Okay. Did he call the roll?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, all flustered now. All of a sudden, my papers all disappeared. Stuck to something there somewhere.
Yeah, we can record it for you. You want us to do it, Stream.
Well,
Stop.
just there's two streams. There's a stream that comes down that the road cross, and it intersects with another stream, and at that point it becomes perennial and heads down towards Kurt's.
Stay close.
All the streams head go.
On that particular side of town, all streams head towards Kurt's.
Kurt's basement, the confluence of all water.
Until you get.
We're all set, John.
All right. My place.
Gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
Anticlimactic. But thank you very much.
So we can come in and pick that up, or?
Oh, well, remember, I was waiting for you as to who I should mail the certificate
Just
of
decide.
compliance to.
I'll pick it
Now
out.
I'll pick it up and
Okay.
take care of it.
All right, very good.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Back to your phone.
Thank you. And I believe that results in all the properties on Turcot Memorial Drive now being in a closed and finalized state for their orders of conditions.
Fabulous.
So now I just have to investigate whether there's anything further moving up Newburyport Turnpike.
Up meaning towards Newburyport or towards Ipswich?
Well, yeah, I inadvertently ended up working my way out. Going
North.
In a northbound direction, for whatever reason.
Foster, the mill. Dan,
Oh, okay.
are you ready for me to read the next agenda item?
Yeah, go ahead, I'm just,
Something just happened to my sheet. Oh, wait.
It was 8:35, new request for certificate of compliance, number 63-128, for 676 Newburyport Turnpike, map 21, parcel 21, Cheryl A. Foster, that's the site of the jewel mill. Doesn't say that, but that's what it is. The jewel mill. Fulling mill.
It's on.
Right off of Glen Street,
Okay.
the first intersection coming down Route 1 towards Raleigh and Take
Yeah.
Party.
Oh, the old mill there
Yes.
where the water has been, I guess for the wheel?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They call it the jewel mill?
Yeah.
The newer terminology for it.
Certainly not the original termination.
No.
There are 2 or 3 others before that.
Originally, probably the first fulling mill in America, which has something to do with making cotton or something before you make further looms. Undoubtedly, they weren't called that. Just as an information item for the commission, the Community Preservation Act Committee, of which I'm a member representing this group, had sent a letter to Ms. Foster with regard to a grant that she had received for about $15,000 to make repairs to the dam and the mill wheel. And she did not like the terms of the historic preservation restriction that was required. And other than spend some small amount of money representing about $1,300, the remaining amount of was just been languishing, and we requested that she give consideration, if she were not going forward to it, to return that money to the Community Preservation Committee. She is subsequently married from the time of that original application and grant receipt, and she and her husband are actively interested in reopening the activity to do restoration activity with regard to the mill wheel, and may request additional funds from the committee for that purpose, so it's become active on the table again.
well, in regards to their 1988 permit for installing a sewage disposal system, I recommend the issuance of complete certificate of compliance. We have received the engineer's statement as well as certified plans, including the certificate of compliance issued by the Board of Health, and as well as a statement from the engineer that their utilization of a poured concrete wall instead of a masonry wall actually resulted in that wall being a increased distance away from the bank of the Mill River, and so therefore there's technically less disturbance in this project being put in. And I believe, according to the Board of Health, it's inspected on a regular basis because they utilize a Clivus mulchum toilet. I think so.
That's
They
right,
actually,
I'd forgotten about
so
that.
so they actually have a covenant restriction where they have to have that inspected on a periodic basis, and the Board of Health's gotten a report on that. So, and there were no ongoing conditions in the original order that was issued for that.
Is that an incinerator?
Pardon me?
Is that
No.
an incinerator one? It's
No,
just a
composting toilet.
Compost.
It's what is commonly called a composting toilet.
Like your old outhouse, updated.
Yeah.
It's an in-house. Any questions? Concerns? Do I hear a motion in accordance with Brent's recommendation to approve this?
So,
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? None? Passed unanimously. That brings us to anything Brett may have with regard to status reports, permits, and enforcement matters.
Yes. I do. Oh, and in regards to that, this is the removed and reseeded and soon to be mulched area at the Jewel Mill on this Forster Cahill's property. The
So that's showing the straw.
that's showing original surface contours. Actually, it's just been reseeded. They haven't mulched it with straw yet, but they're going to do that. The small landscaping debris pile was actually a 6-yard dumpster's worth plus the back of this pickup truck. When all was said and done. So, but per our request, it's all been removed. And just waiting to get the seed to germinate, which the weather conditions are actually optimum for that at this point in time. So there's one. Kurt, in regards to discussing the National Wildlife Refuge and the Marine Biological Labs, would you like me to make a copy of that email with my points on it as a discussion piece? Just to bring the commission up to what the current status is. You may recall seeing this image at some point in time, and Marine Biological Labs, their Ecosystems Research Center, contacted our office in regards to the possibility of erecting a wooden platform with this aluminum mast for telemetry for collecting data, I think, on gases and other things in the salt marsh. And they had already erected one of these on the National Wildlife Refuge property, and they were seeking permission to erect this one partially on Greenbelt property and the solar collector on town property. This proceeded to the point where we I actually recommended that the Marine Biological Labs folks apply to the selectmen for permission on the municipal property, thinking that they should get that first prior to actually filing a permit under the Wetlands Protection Act and our town's bylaw, because if it didn't get selectmen approval or there was some concern, that would cause having to adjust whatever application. But I had consulted with both Doug Watson and Kurt Turner in regards to the fact that this appeared to be an activity that definitely needed a permit. You'll see in the photograph that there's a boat tied up to the wooden platform. It's bigger than a doghouse. And also, in the course of discussions with the Marine Biological Lab folks, they made a statement that they're utilizing a repetitive footpath had actually damaged a portion of the salt marsh where they'd worn down to the soil, getting to this thing, or either getting to where they launched the boat or whatever. So anyway, segue that to contacting the Fish and Wildlife folks and saying that MBL needed to apply for a permit for both of these locations. We received a communication from the, what's his title?
The refuge man?
Yeah, Deputy Refuge Manager Frank Verstuski, who stated to me that they were exempt from needing to file a permit. I respectfully asked for where that exemption was actually stated specifically, and I was emailed a document that was described as being U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Environmental Policy Act Reference Handbook, Categorical Exclusions. There was no accompanying guidance of which paragraph, which section of the 3-page document that I was given as to where this was. Actually, excuse me, it's 4 pages. So I read the whole thing, and actually what I found was within the second sentence, categorical exclusions are not the equivalent of statutory exemptions. It then goes on to say under resource management, which I think is where this falls, research, inventory, and information collection activities directly related to the conservation of fish and wildlife resources which involve negligible animal mortality or habitat destruction, no introduction of contaminants, and no introduction of organisms not indigenous to the affected ecosystem. So I actually wasn't sure that that's what the heck was being talked about here, but I again noticed that the sentence exactly prior to that says, prior to carrying out these actions, the service should coordinate with affected federal agencies, state, tribal, and local governments. Again, we weren't coordinated with. We didn't know that this was erected out in the marsh. And so I sought advice from DEP, the circuit rider, who turned over the information I provided to the Northeast Region's General Counsel. And I was told by the General Counsel, who I actually had a phone call with yesterday, that Fish and Wildlife Service is not exempt from the statutory and regulatory requirements of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Town of Raleigh's Wetlands Protection Bylaw also. So subsequently, myself and DEP's counsel, Dorothy Montoris, were copied on an email from Mr. Krakowski that said, after discussing the monitoring set up by MBL on Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, it is our regional solicitor's opinion that a request for determination by the Raleigh Conservation Commission is not necessary based on the temporary nature of the monitoring equipment, its small size, and its significant impact on the resource. Insignificant impact on the resource. This applies to all similar activities located on refuge land. As discussed in earlier emails, research and monitoring are inherent Fish and Wildlife Service activities that are conducted on National Wildlife Refuge by us, our partners and cooperators, on a regular basis. Our hands would be tied if these activities required permits. That's the end of the email.
Is that structure made out of pressure-treated lumber?
Well, the problem here is as I started to outline for you, again, DEP's counsel says they're not exempt. And in fact, what they've emailed me doesn't say they're exempt either. In fact, it says it's not a statutory exemption.
Mine too.
Yeah. And also, as I point out in my points on the memo, the Concom is the local regulatory authority that determines whether a activity is significant or has an impact on the protectable resource areas. Also, Marine Biological Labs approached me initially and even applied to our selectmen and said that this was their research. They just happened to be doing it on Fish and Wildlife property, and they were proposed to do it on town and Greenbelt property. We've had other research projects. I think Tufts, Northeastern, all of them have applied to permits or
BU.
applied to us for permits, BU, yeah. And no matter whose real estate they've conducted the activity on, because they've been smack dab in the wetland resource areas and have the potential for causing, a possibly detrimental impact. So then, as I stated in number 3, I was actually told by the representative of Marine Biological Labs that they had in fact negatively impacted salt marsh, so they had altered resource area. And then 5, I just say, anything that alters it subject to review. We've got an image that shows a platform which looks an awful lot like a float or a dock, which if constructed out in the marsh, we would require a permit for it.
Oil rigs.
Yeah, an oil rig, it's got a boat.
It obviously goes flat.
It's got a boat tied up to it, so it's, obviously bigger than a bread box. And so then I state, the documentation sent clearly stated that there was an exemption from statutory regulation. And my comment, which is really only for the eyes of the commission here, is based on the attitude, tone, and substance of the emails. His position from a certain perspective could be described as being a predetermined answer that has been in search of the question ever since I brought up the matter. And actually, Attorney Montoris said it very succinctly. She said, just because it's an inconvenience for them to apply for a permit is not a statutory exemption. So,
And that's the hands tied issue right there.
well, her suggestion, and I pass this on for the commission's consideration, I will of course follow your advice and recommendation, is to contact both the refuge again, Mr. Krakowski, and request specific written statutory citation of where this exemption exists, and specifically in reference to this activity and not some other nebulous in the future research activities. And also, I feel we should issue notices of violation to both of them.
Yeah, I think they should be here.
Well, have you seen Doug's latest email on this subject?
The first one that
Did he put out this afternoon?
alerted today that he wasn't coming out, yes.
Have any-
And I felt that email was in supportive of this, actually.
I don't know that I brought it with me, but, do you have it?
I can go print it out. No, I didn't.
Oh, he's suggesting that,
He said he felt, I've kept him abreast of this, and he's felt all along that they needed to apply for a permit.
right,
I mean, we actually felt from day one that this was extremely similar to the platform that we just saw in the newspaper that was built over in Ipswich, where they required a notice of intent application for that platform where they've been applying the fertilizer stuff.
Doug is recommending, as I recall the email, that we asked councils to discuss it among themselves and again ask them to submit a written request. He's not ready to move forward on a notice of violation type of thing. And my initial reaction was that something like that might get their attention better, but since we're dealing with another type of regulatory agency, that it might be useful to go one more step towards trying to bring reason to the process before we...
Well, that's why I felt a notice of violation which is what I discussed with Attorney Montrose, with that specific request for documentation, but you want just a letter?
Well, let's postpone this until,
I can go print out Doug's
Yeah,
email right
please,
now,
yeah.
just give me a moment, I'm sorry, I didn't
you
know.
may have two there. I mean, the one you were referring to and then another one.
So what you're saying is, your sense is that he wants to proceed cautiously,
Yes,
and make sure that we have all our ducks in a row.
yes.
Well,
It
or at
seems
least
like
give them an option to
Yeah.
recognize the
Yeah.
fact that maybe.
Yeah, that it's gonna get
it's
ramped
on
up.
my side. Could I see the picture? Thanks. Well, those 4x4s definitely look pressure treated.
Yeah. That must go flat, right? I mean, I'm not out there. It must go flat. It doesn't get, it's not wet all the time, right? Just at high tides.
Yeah,
Depends on where it is, yeah.
I would assume so from the standpoint that Brent was saying that they
People would trample.
created.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
green map, or that green picture right there, the circled area,
Yeah.
doesn't look, I mean, the water courses are, well, maybe it's right on the water course, I don't know. It doesn't pinpoint the location.
Yeah, it doesn't pinpoint the locations.
But it obviously has to be deep enough to put,
Okay,
The stem of the
I see the nuances that you're referring to. It's the second, the last paragraph in this email. See, I was considering the notice of violation as basically it's just kind of a communication because it has no official it's not an enforcement order, which is actually where I thought this was going to.
and I'd say you're right, but he's probably cautious, being cautious, and I think
Well,
that's
right, well,
probably smart of him.
the only reason I choose to use a document that's entitled Notice of Violation is because that's what's specifically alluded to in our bylaw.
Mhm.
Our bylaw specifically talks about when it lays out a process of how to talk to a property owner about whether they're subject to regulation, it specifically names something called a notice of violation. There really isn't an official form. There's no DEP form that's called a notice of violation. So all that is putting a title on a written communication that you make as the regulator to the party who you believe should be the regulatee.
So this is ongoing right now, right? It's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, it's been out there. Yeah.
It's been out there for a while.
So
So
he's basically.
waiting a little longer,
Well, it's not a question of longer, it's just a question of how much time do you
Right.
want?
how much, yeah, exactly.
Because again,
Understood.
just to give you a significant point here, and both DEP's counsel and I noticed this right off, his email to us never names who it is he's supposedly utilizing as a source. Yeah, this solicitor, I mean, we don't know who this solicitor is, where they are. He never provides, I always have to ask for what the backup is to what he's supposedly saying, and that's why when he finally did produce that categoric exemption to me, in a sense, I was glad he made me read through the whole thing, because it made me realize that he didn't read through the whole thing either, because if he did, he wouldn't have bothered to send it to me, because it undermined his argument. But what he always keeps saying to me is, oh, if we had to do this all the time, we'd be tied up.
Hamstrung.
So from what he's
So-
saying, this is gonna be precedent for their ongoing projects in the future where he doesn't think they need permits.
Without doubt.
But it's not.
Obviously, it has to be settled.
But it's not.
But it needs to be
They
settled
applied
down.
to this commission to put an observation blind in at the William Forward pools, the impoundments that are halfway
Mhm.
down the island that are in Rowley. There's almost as much construction involved in this platform as there is in that observation blind.
So Doug's
It's
saying he
very
wants the
simple.
DEP attorney to talk to their solicitor, I guess, right?
Yeah, oh, and she would like to, but again, he doesn't give And he copied DEP's counsel on the email that was addressed to me, but she said, yeah, she said, I looked at that and noticed that there wasn't any name and no way for me to contact them, or we don't even know what they're being told.
So
Regional
can you-
solicitor we're talking about is the Fish and Wildlife.
The regional
Attorney?
solicitor, yes, somewhere in the
We're
Department of
talking about the
Interior.
National Wildlife Refuge folks.
Yes, we are talking about the National Fish and Wildlife Refuge.
I'm
They're
sorry.
part of the Department of Interior.
I mean what do I-
General counsel is DEP. Regional solicitor is Fish and Wildlife somewhere in the Department of Interior.
Right, but the Marine Biological Lab,
They're the actual research people, they're,
but they aren't,
Yes.
they've applied to us before on several
Yes, they
occasions,
have,
so we're
yes.
not the problem, but they're on Fish and Wildlife land, and the Fish and Wildlife people saying you don't need to do this.
that is
So what
correct.
we need-
They're confused just as we are.
I think if I can put words in Doug's mouth here, he would like to try to have the DEP council get a hold of and talk to the National Fish and Wildlife folks, attorney.
Yes,
And if we could somehow get a name out of that, that would facilitate, her having someone to talk to rather than put the burden on her to do that. That would be helpful, I think, before we,
her who?
her,
Montoros?
yes,
Well, no, Montoros is DEP's counsel.
I know, but.
She would like to talk to,
What
but
I'm suggesting is we provide her with a name that she should contact.
well, I gotta go call her first to make sure, because my initial impression was that we were going to try to facilitate. She said, because the email was addressed to me, she didn't bother to respond to Mr. Drukuski.
Right, but she shouldn't, Doug is suggesting that we bypass that gentleman that you just talked about and,
Well, right, but I
And
can't
get
because
lawyer to
he's
lawyer.
controlling all the information. I don't know who this is that he's talking to.
well, there ought to be a way to find out
Well,
who
I'm
their,
gonna ma- I'm
who their
gonna make a
regional,
request.
who their
Right.
regional solicitor is.
So you can make that request
I'm
without
gonna
a
make that
notice of a
request.
violation.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can do it just as
I
an
mean,
email.
although the gravity of the request would have more weight potentially if it was
No,
a
no, 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 we are the local permit granting authority.
Right.
We are actually the ones that should be being provided
Yeah.
appropriate information
Right.
in regards to this.
So in
Yes.
that sense,
Yeah,
we should be able to get that information from him
we should.
Yeah, without.
without
yeah.
a notice of
It
violation.
may be at the next meeting, we'll be
Conservative.
talking about a notice of violation.
Right, exactly.
Let's see if we can do it, get things rolling so that people are talking with each other in some way. I mean, I would support Doug on this rather than,
Right.
even though my initial reaction was in accordance with what you had said.
Well, but like I said, you have to understand that, the whole tone of this communication has been being driven by this Mr. Drukuski
Yeah.
and his predetermined answer that he's exempt. He self-diagnosed himself. He said that he's
Right.
exempt. That's what he said right from the beginning. And whenever he's been asked to substantiate that, we find it less than clear-cut that they're exempt. And in fact, like I said, so far DEP, who I presume has a little bit more knowledge and experience in such things, is saying specifically that they aren't.
Well, you might try to bypass him and call with National Wildlife
Well, I
people
have
and
to-
ask who their regional solicitor is and.
Well, actually, what I'm going to do is when I copy him back, I noticed that in this particular email exchange, he didn't bother to copy his manager as I have in the past.
Hmm.
And so I will copy the refuge manager,
Yeah.
Graham Taylor,
Yeah.
when I write and make the request, but I'm going to ask specifically for the name of their regional solicitor. I'm also going to ask for specific written citation and statutory reference containing the exemptions and who makes that determination.
That's good. I'd recommend as a sidebar that you also try to get a hold of that name without going through those folks.
Yeah, I have to go through them because I have no idea. He could be talking to Washington DC for all I know.
Yeah,
I know,
right.
but you could just call the wildlife folks and, they're a public body, they have to respond to questions like that.
Yeah, but they're a hell of a lot bigger. I don't know how many offices.
We got the power.
There could be more than one regional solicitor.
I was gonna say, there's
He could be
probably
on the
boards
phone
of
for a
them.
while. Right.
Yes, well, anyway,
We're the kid with the slingshot.
yeah,
Anyway. Okay, I think we have a direction
yes,
reasonably
we
set,
definitely do.
like, to go forward here without at this point.
Well, we've gotta get the end of
Saying
the,
notice of violation to anybody.
well, but that's not the point. The whole point is, we've got damage to the salt marsh occurring out there right now. We've got a valid research institution that wishes to conduct research, which I'm sure the commission is actually supportive of, as long as they do it in a proper manner.
Right.
And this,
They're
and
not
this,
to blame. They're
and
just-
this
they're
type
caught in
of
the middle.
stonewalling
Yeah.
is not, this isn't very respectful to the commission. I mean, we just issued them a permit for
know.
redoing their gravel road. Why did they bother to come to us for that? They weren't building a new road, they were just putting new gravel on it.
Yeah.
Because they are aware of our sensitivities and they want to keep.
No,
our
I think
business.
because the Federal Highway Administration
Was
was
involved,
involved and
yeah.
knew that
And
they
they
needed
had
to
to
get
do
the
it.
permit. They knew they weren't
Could be.
exempt.
This,
Because they wouldn't have been doing it at all based on
is
this.
this the facility that's dumping 2,000 pounds every 4 days of nitrogen and other chemicals?
MBL, yeah, it is part of
This is
their
that?
same, it's part of the same
Well,
research group,
yeah.
yes.
Certainly agree that we should go forward with all due deliberate speed. Um, So they never did come before us on that.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
But the part of the research in Raleigh did not involve the actual injection of the fertilizer. That's over in Ipswich. They came to us because they needed to put up nets, and I think their control area is over in Raleigh. I think they were using the Raleigh side as a control and looking at the Ipswich side where they're actually adding the doses of nutrients.
Those pictures that show the earth splitting in two, the marsh splitting in two,
I can show you a number of those.
was that in Raleigh or in Ipswich?
I don't know, it wasn't specifically
Because I was,
attributed, but I believe if they were going to that platform, that they more than likely took those pictures in Ipswich on their way to that platform.
the platform itself is in Ipswich, did you say?
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
My understanding is it is.
Have you talked with the agent in Ipswich about this?
No, because he's had a personal tragedy in his family. His mom just passed away. In fact, I had to miss the viewing tonight because of the meeting, but
It's too bad.
he hasn't been working for, I believe, since that article came out.
Well, it's an interesting situation. Anything else? Oh, go ahead.
I just had a question about the carriage pines before we break up, but go ahead with whatever else you had.
All right, well, I was just gonna say, I received a written request from the Raleigh Municipal Water Department in regards to our orders of conditions. Normally have a requirement that work, soil disturbance, and earth-moving activities stop on November 15th, usually due to deteriorating weather conditions and ground conditions. They've requested that they be allowed to work and that be extended to December 31st. Most of that is centered around doing the directional drilling for the crossing. Their project is actually at the state, and I will be emailing you the photograph of my inspection yesterday. They started pouring the vertical walls. The foundation slab is all in, and now they're doing the reinforcing bar.
Right, I saw
and
those
pouring-
pictures
Pouring the walls. Yeah.
of the footing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, now they've progressed to doing the walls, so.
They run-
But they're really not gonna be doing an awful lot of other earthwork or whatever. It's mostly just to give the directional drilling guys enough time.
Plus it's frozen, hopefully.
Well, I told them that, of course, we have a condition in there that talked about appropriate ground conditions or whatever, so, you know, with the commission's permission, I was going to reply to them basically saying that, you know, this is subject to deteriorating weather conditions actually stopping, you know, construction activities. I mean, obviously, they can't engage in snow removal out there. The silt fence would never, ever stand to have snow plowed up to it, and they had to do something like that, so. I think most of their focus is on the structure at this point in time, except for the directional drilling, which is what this is really wanting to make sure that they don't run it into the timeline on that.
Do we want to extend from when to when?
Well, normally, we cut things off on November 15th, but they're requesting till December 31st.
Well, in accordance with your suggestion and caveat, I have no problem with that.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
It shouldn't be a problem.
The Carriage Pines, the whole question there seems to be, in order for them to do this development, the open space, they need open space.
Right.
And the open space is a golf course. So where do we fit into, can open space be golf course? Or don't we fit in? Because when you read this, they say the open space is the golf course, and they say the prohibitive acts in open space are constructing any buildings, excavating, mining, putting in conduits, and they say the exceptions will be, we can build buildings, we can put in pesticides, we can do everything that says you can't do.
And we're gonna mine.
So basically, they're just turning their golf course into open space and doing anything they want.
That's
Only
only
they're reading the first 3 pages.
for reading, well, that's kind of my impression from just reading probably just
And then
even
they
less than what
say,
you. Well, so this is where the challenge comes, and this is where we have the opportunity to provide input, because obviously the applicant wants things
His way.
the least restrictive they are possible, and especially looking towards the future where they don't know what might be planned or not planned. On the other hand, the whole idea behind a conservation restriction is to preserve and protect and provide community access to natural resources.
well, then they say
and
they'll provide
vistas.
public access and trails, but then they say there will be no public access when the golf course is open. So they're basically doing what they want to do, and
Well, is possibly a challenge here that maybe, again, can possibly be overcome by being more specific and more finite and actually getting down to the nitty-gritty. We have when Windover proposed their project, they proposed this portion of the property to be actually restored and have the paved gulch paths and the creosote landscape ties removed and stuff from it, and we have a fairly accurate delineation of wetland resources over there. There's also the fact that they would be proposing work in jurisdictional areas of the commission, and in some places over there, I believe we had 1 or 2 vernal pools where we more than likely would not permit any development activity. So that's why a plan showing where prohibited uses and where the natural resources are that one wants to preserve and protect and provide the community some access to, at least to view it, if not to just walk by it and smell the fresh air, so to speak. But it's also incumbent upon this applicant to produce a plan like that and also show where they feel there might be future activity, so we can try to figure out whether that is of a nature and character that could be documented in a conservation restriction and might possibly pass muster with the state in order to make it perpetual. That's the challenge.
The whole premise is to keep everything Dodge Road side,
Yeah.
to prevent this.
This is not
They
a
don't wanna
40B,
be-
right?
No, it is not.
I don't think it's even age restricted, is it?
No.
Well, I mean, the golf course ownership previously came before us at various times to get permission to do certain things with regard to restructuring waterways or repairing them, and all those were dealt with in appropriate fashion on a number of occasions, and there's no reason why these folks should be given carte blanche ahead of time to do what they want with it. I think we need to make it pretty clear that we need to be the controlling body with regard to this restriction, conservation restriction.
Well, at this point in time, especially without a plan, it would be hard for anyone to possibly participate and be any type of reviewer.
It's a moot point until we get those.
Right, yeah, and it has to clearly show where certain things are either proposed in the
what are they
future or
talking
not
about?
proposed, yeah. Yeah, because I can't imagine that anyone could possibly think that they want to put, say, tennis courts up anywhere within that property and plunk them like right where the vernal pool is. I mean, that's not gonna make any sense. There's portions of that property that are hard to get to from Dodge Road or from where their few facilities are located right now, presently. In fact, almost all their facilities are on the Dodge Road side of the ponds. I don't think there's really any type of structure except maybe a bench and an overhang roof on the other side.
There's the bridge,
Yeah.
and that's it,
Yeah.
and benches.
Well, some of the residents, people who live along Dodge Road there are rather upset at the whole idea of putting up this residence community, and there has been a move afoot, led by one individual in particular, to put forth the idea that the town ought to acquire this and make it a municipal golf course, possibly with the aid of Community Preservation Act committee funds. And they're talking about, seems to me, $3 million. I have a lot of problems with that proposal, and don't think the town should be in the business of running municipal golf courses or even subcontracting that out, but it hasn't come formally before the committee yet, and they're just rumors, and I've been approached on various times by people to see how I feel about it. And bottom line is, at this point in time anyway, I don't feel good about it, but that would change all of this if that were to go forward in a way that might appear it would be headed to its consummation. But
I don't know if that's actually gonna go through. Presently there's a move to seek scenic route designation of Dodge Road and other roads that have been identified by the master plan, the Raleigh master plan. Where that process is right at this moment, not exactly sure. Tomorrow I might know better. No.
Is that like a scenic vista type thing?
Right, right. They've already been identified, Weathersfield Road, Dodge Road, and
What does that do?
others.
There'll be restrictions to the view, obstructing the view.
Right, all that does is, making the request to have this done requires that the planning board adopt a scenic byway bylaw, which they don't have presently. So all of that has to, first you have to make the request, it has to be put against the board, does its thing, and then it happens or it doesn't happen.
that's got to be approved by the state, I think, and the town's been trying to get Route 1A designated as I don't know whether they've ever achieved that, and they've been working on that for years.
Right, so at the present time, I don't know where that is. But I have talked to, I can't think of her name.
Oh, Katrina O'Leary?
Katrina.
The town planner?
Yeah, so.
Murphy? Kelly?
Do these people actually own this property now, or
No.
are they
No,
looking at
It's
buying it if they can do
by
what
April.
they want to do?
by April, and that's where this,
Okay, so,
where this potential, scenic bylaws issue comes into play, because they want to change the driveways and stuff like, the entrance-ways and stuff like that. And I don't know how that's gonna pan out. I don't know anything about how that's gonna happen, or if it's gonna happen at all. I mean, I don't like golf courses either.
I've got nothing against golf courses.
I don't, I do, but they're nice open spaces, it's,
That's true. But there are lots of other competing interests for open space acquisition by the town other than that.
agreed.
Anyway, any other agenda items of interest?
I don't think so, just to make a brief mention that the Sprint cell tower, Smith Lane folks, seem to have run into a delay in trying to address the commission's concerns and actually get the site work done. They requested a further continuance from the planning board because they seem to have an inability to get a contractor out there to do the half-day's landscaping work that's involved.
This is behind the ball fields, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Down the woods road.
Yeah.
the
I used to walk my
10
dog
heading
down,
towards the
yeah,
back of the
yeah.
Girl Scouts.
Been some recent merger activity with regard to Sprint
Yes.
involving Clearwire. I don't know who's acquiring whom, but.
Yeah. As
that
well
may-
as whoever
that may
owned the
interest.
tower or whatever was being bought out or something too, so it's, I don't know. In the news, the sums of money mentioned are astronomically greater than what the little bit of site work that needs to be done out there that could be accomplished by two guys, a pickup truck, and about 6 yards of good loam.
And shovels and rakes.
And a bag of grass seed.
All right, anything else? That's it?
That's it.
Your motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? None? Unanimous?